Hello, it's me, Raynarde. I'm here. You can call me Ray. Do you know what else is here, folks? Summer is here. Election season is here. Hurricane season is here. And all of it is making me just a twinge nervous. Who am I kidding? I'm nervous all of the time. But I have a wonderful support system around me to help me with that. I have my husband. I have various sorts of media. I can entertain myself. And I got books. If nobody got me, at least books got me. Can I get an amen? So I wanted to do what a lot of people have been doing on YouTube and have been doing a mid-year review of the books they've read thus far instead of waiting until December and then putting out an hours long video. So far this year, I've read 12 books. I'm nearly done with 2, and I'll go over that in a minute. And I've listened to 6 books. So currently I am nearly done with The Sound and Fury by William Faulkner. Faulkner, I hardly know her. Clearly, I'm not done reading difficult books, and this book, it's not nearly as difficult as Ulysses was. I think the thing that's great about this book is how it's all self-contained. I will probably need to consult wiki or any other references online just to make sure I understand some of the plot. Also, something a little different I've been in the middle of taking it slow though is Lao Tzu's Tao Te Ching. I've always wanted to read Eastern philosophy. I didn't want to start with like the obvious suspects like Confucius or Sun Tzu, but I was intrigued by the Tao Te Ching mainly because Ursula Le Guin, she applied a lot of what she learned from the Tao Te Ching into her own life and into her writings. And so what better way than to read it? As I said before, I'm taking it slow. I'm nearly halfway through. It's not a long book, as you can see. But I'm slowly going through each of the chapters, trying to absorb and understand it. It's very back and forth with its philosophy. After I'm done with those 2, I'll be reading The Master and the Margarita by Bulgakov. I'm really excited to read this. I've been wanting to read this for the longest time, ever since I learned about it. I'm fascinated with not only the subject matter, but also how it pertains to the author and the experience of being in a hyper censored society of Soviet Russia. Speaking of Russian literature, I've also been slowly going through George Saunders' A Swim in a Pond in the Rain. That's a great book. I'm really taking my time with that because I'm trying to let everything sink in as slow as possible. I started that earlier in the year and then I kind of put it on the shelf momentarily, but I'm going back to that one. That's a great book. But without further ado, let's talk about what I've read thus far. So the first book I've read this year was Kiki's Delivery Service by Eiko Kadono. I wanted to start off a little light and something that was cute and warm and cozy, and I felt like I got that with Kiki's Delivery Service. You're probably familiar with the anime adaptation of the book, so it was fascinating to see how different it was from the source material. But if you've watched the movie, it's pretty much almost one-to-one. And it's really cozy, really wonderfully written. It's a cute book, definitely a cute book. And I got through it in like a couple days. So it's definitely one of my favorites so far this year. For those who don't know, the story of Kiki's Delivery Service follows the titular Kiki, who is a witch who is coming of age. As a rite of passage, witches go to a town somewhere and they sort of help out any way they can with a certain talent. Kiki's mom, I believe, was into herbology and potion making, so she would make salves and medicines for the people. I think what's wonderful about this book is how people view witches in this world as like, oh, you're a witch. Okay, cool. Like, instead of, the Salem witch trials, overcorrection there. Definitely recommend it if you want something light and cute, and definitely watch the anime movie too, because it's a Ghibli film and Ghibli films are all wonderful. Number 2 is The Portrait of an Artist as a Young Man by James Joyce. If you've seen my Ulysses video, you'll probably be a little familiar with this. It's his first real novel, but it's his second published work after the Dubliner short story collection. Joyce created a character in Portrait of the Artist named Stephen Dedalus, who serves as himself. It's his autobiographical character, essentially. A story about Stephen Dedalus growing up through boarding school, his crisis of faith when he's a kid, and his coming to terms with his identity as an artist. It is written first very childish and kind of run-on sentency. And then as the book progresses, as Stephen gets older, he becomes more sophisticated with his words and is more intelligent. And the writing reflects that as the passage of time. It's a really interesting book to have read. It's a difficult book, but still a good book. This was more of a means to an ends read for me, but I still enjoyed it. If you plan on reading Ulysses, you have to read Portrait in order to get some context as to who Stephen Dedalus is, as well as there's some background information. And there's even references in this book that was referenced in Ulysses. And I was like, oh yeah, that's that guy. And they're referencing that conversation he had with his schoolmate. So definitely a good read. I mean, but by itself, it's a fascinating read, and I recommend it for anybody just mildly curious. Just know that you're in for a difficult book. Next up was Yellowface by R.F. Kuang, and this was her first contemporary literature fiction, and I think it's a pretty strong step forward. Yellowface chronicles the story of a author, June Hayworth. She's a white author. That's important. And she's not nearly as successful as her friend named Athena, who is an Asian American author. Athena is a well-renowned author. She's multi-award winning, and she's this prodigy, essentially. And so one night after a night of drinking, Athena dies. But that night, June discovers that Athena has been working on a novel, which Athena has said has been kind of like the thing that she's been working on for a long time. It's a story about Chinese labor workers during one of I think the First World War. I can't remember, forgive me. So June decides in this sort of frenzy of emotions that she's going to take this book. She edits it and she decides she's going to publish it under her own name. The book is written in a first person perspective, and so it's kind of horrifying to be in this person's mind and have her try to rationalize these really awful things that she's doing. I think R.F. Kuang, this was a good first book for me to be introduced to R.F. Kuang's body of work. I'm also interested to read Babel, but this was, I think, a good first step into this contemporary literary world for her, and I'm curious to see what she comes up with next. This book had a lot of discussions surrounding it, and I'm not at liberty to discuss it or really be a participant of it, all to say that, like, you know, it asks a lot of interesting questions about the publishing industry right now, today. Really a solid book. Very, very easy to get through. I got through it in like a week or two. This was the next book was a very fascinating read. It was Invisible Cities by Italo Calvino. I don't know how to categorize this. It's, I guess, philosophical fiction. So the story is framed as a conversation between Kublai Khan and Marco Polo, with Marco Polo being the primary narrator of this book. The book has these small passages in between the meat of it, with which Marco Polo and Kublai Khan are having a discussion. Kublai Khan is curious about these cities that Marco Polo has been to. Each chapter as its own city, and all these cities are these there are these fantastic places. They don't exist in real life, but there's a certain thing about the city that pertains to a quality of the human condition or human thought process. One of my favorites and a really fascinating one was there was a city with which below it was like a necropolis, with which when you die in the city, whatever your occupation was. So let's say, I think the example was a bookseller. If you're a bookseller that died in the city, your body gets embalmed and all that jazz, and you get taken to the bookstore in the necropolis, and you're propped up there, and that's where you stay. It was a really fascinating read. Calvino is a wordsmith. There were just so many passages that I was like, whoa, it was really crazy and trippy to read. I have If on a Winter's Night a Traveler, I think his most well-known book, on the shelf back there, and I'm going to read that at some point this year. But Invisible Cities was an interesting read, quick read too, and a book that I feel I'm going to go back to. It's one of those rare books where I feel like, I kind of want more of this, or I want to revisit this again. And it definitely turned me on to Calvino's body of work. Next up is a book I had seen a lot on like Instagram, people talking about it all the time. And I figured what better way to get into Murakami's body of work than his first success, and that is Norwegian Wood. Hi, me editing in the future. So looking back on the footage, I did a really poor job of trying to summarize my feelings for this book. And I think it speaks to my overall feelings of this book, in that I'm conflicted that I didn't hate this book, but I'm not sure why I liked it either. So this was a book about a time during the late 60s, early 70s. The narrator is a Japanese college student who is in love with a girl of his youth. That both of them are connected by the narrator's best friend who died, and the girl is unrequiting in the love for him, and she has a lot of mental issues and is going through a rough time. Well-written read. The subject matter is very heavy. I don't really recommend it if you're somebody who is going through a rough patch in their life right now. This isn't a healthy book for you. But the thing that was fascinating for me about this book, and I think a lot of Murakami books are like this, I think I've heard this, is that Murakami is wonderful in his references to other books and music. When he referenced Magic Mountain that the narrator was reading, I'm like, well, I guess I got to add that to my to be read pile. There's the Centaur. I guess I should add that too. There was this really funny, fascinating, restoring my faith in humanity moment where he referenced a song that I had never heard of. And so I Googled it. I looked it up on YouTube. And in the comments section on YouTube underneath this song were other people who stopped reading at that spot in the book to listen to this song. And it was a really fun communal thing, and it kind of restored my faith momentarily in that, wow, the internet can be a wonderful place after all. So thank you, Murakami-san. Again, I'm conflicted about this book, as evident with my editing here right now. I was not doing a really good job, and I was trying to sort out my feelings. And after finally thinking about it some more, I've decided it's not the worst. It's not a bad book. But I don't think it's a book I'll revisit it anytime soon. I'm not sure I jive with how the women in this book are portrayed. One of them being really hypersexual, bizarrely, and they dote. A lot of these women kind of dote on the narrator, and he's kind of, I don't think he's uninteresting, but he's not exactly trying either. I don't know. A lot of people have commented that Murakami's portrayal of women early on in his career has been a little problematic. Don't get me wrong. I think it was a fascinating and really well-written book, and Murakami definitely deserves a lot of the success that has come his way, whether he likes it or not. I don't think he's big on the fame bit. I will say the theme of death not being an end to life, but perhaps part of it, in that death takes in account those that survive the deceased and the thing that we carry along with it. And so that was a fascinating aspect of the text that I can appreciate. It's a good book. I just think that, just know that it's got some rough patches, and maybe that's just a symptom of Murakami's younger writing days. I'm not sure, But I'm still curious to read IQ 84 and Kafka on the Shore, Wind Up Bird Chronicles too. Those three I definitely would like to read at some point in the future. So that's what I think. So I was sick earlier this year with a cold. I hadn't been sick in a while, and I wanted something light to read during this time. And I decided to read a kid's book, and I figured Thin Family Moomin Troll is going to be the book that I'm going to read. I fell in love with the Moomins last year. I read Comet in Moominland, and I watched the anime series. That's free on YouTube. You can watch it right now. Oh my God, I love the Moomins. Normalize whatever is going on in Moomin Valley. So if you don't know, these little hippopotamus characters here, that is a Moomin. Basically trolls is what they are. But they're cute and they're fluffy, and they live in a place called Moomin Valley, and has like an eclectic collection of like animals that talk and creatures. Usually the books chronicle like a fantastical event that's the main connective tissue with all these little shorter stories that surround it. But there's also like this bohemian lifestyle that the Moomins have. They just kind of, they sit around and they eat wonderful food and they go to the beach or they go play in the woods and stuff like that. And it's really idyllic and evergreen, and I love it. And I wish I could live that life. So the main story with this book is they find a hat that belongs to a character called the Hobgoblin. And the hat is this sort of magical wild card device where if you put something in it, something comes out of a different quality. When they're playing hide and seek, the main character, Moomin Troll, hides in the hat, and then he emerges from the hat. But he's this weird, bizarre creature. So everybody's like, who are you? Like, what are you doing here? Where's Moomin Troll? And so he's like, no, it's me. I'm Moomin Troll, and nobody believes him. And then his mom comes into the room, and Moomin Troll's like, surely you recognize me, Mom, like, right? And his mom, without even blinking, was like, yeah, of course I know who you are. You're my son. How could I not know who you are? And it's such a warm, cute story. And that's just one story. There's several heartwarming stories in this series. I've got the memoirs of Moomin Papa and Moomin Summer Madness on the shelf there that I'm going to read. I love these books, and I feel like the world would be a happier place if everybody knew who the Moomins were and would read them. So next up is probably my favorite book I've read so far this year. That is The Heaven and Earth Grocery Store by James McBride. Book's summary frames it as this murder mystery, but it's anything but. It starts off when in the 70s, I believe it's the 70s, when a construction crew unearths a body while doing construction on a well. The book then goes into media res and goes back to the 30s, with which it's documenting the residents of the town, who are primarily Black, Jewish, Italian immigrants, and their relationship to each other. The main conflict of the story comes into play when one of the Black families is trying to hide a child who is deaf from the state, and the town's coming together to sort of help right a wrong that happens because of this. It's a really, really good story, really well written. There were passages in this book that made me gasp. Really, the characters that shine in this book. Each chapter is the perspective of a resident, and McBride's voice is like this chameleon that shifts. This is good writing, is what it is. It's just really well done, and I feel like this book is going to be known as one of the best American novels of the 21st century. Like, in my opinion, in my humblest opinion, the 2020s books, this is going to be up there on that list, I feel. Another really good read that I finished up after Heaven and Earth Grocery Store was Sula by Toni Morrison. I've been really interested to read Morrison's body of work, but I wanted to start off light. Dare say this isn't a light book by any stretch of the imagination. Sula is a fascinating story. It's a story primarily of two girls who live in a town, and they're vastly different upbringings and the ways in which they can stick together and tell each other everything and how they grow apart in their adulthood. It's a story about motherhood, about doubles, about contrasts, and with great momentum can tell this story in a way that doesn't feel boring at all. There's no filler in this book at all. It's one of those books that's just perfectly plotted, and it's a testament to Morrison's fantastic writing. Next up is a big one. I took a little bit of time on this one, and that is Crime and Punishment by Fyodor Dostoevsky. It's not the biggest book. It's no Ulysses. I was unfamiliar with the story of the main character Raskolnikov, who lives in abject poverty in St. Petersburg and decides that he's going to kill somebody as a way of his messed up mindset of trying to do a favor for society. But then what ends up happening is these cracks start to form in his psyche as his situation becomes a little bit more perilous than he had hoped. The murder takes place in the first part of the book, and obviously, we expect the murder to happen. But I think what's fascinating is like it keeps you sort of arrested with the narrative, because you wonder like, how's this guy going to live with this? When's he going to crack? And it's also a fascinating look at how awful and sordid the conditions of St. Petersburg, at least the undercity of St. Petersburg, was. Dostoevsky can write piss poor conditions really well, and I felt claustrophobic and disgusted and really horrible by what I read. Bonus round for Dostoevsky, not really a book, but mainly a short story, is White Nights. I read that got viral on social media when that one person said, I thought I knew what love was until I read White Nights. Which I feel was the same effect that happened with This Is How You Lose the Time War. White Nights is another unrequited story tale, two of those this year after Murakami's story. Man is sort of melancholic, and he finds a girl who's waiting for a lover that she hasn't seen for years, and the protagonist's blossoming love for this woman is the main focal point of the story. It was a good read. I finished it in like 2 days, so it was a solid read. I don't really have anything to say about it. It was just it was a solid read. This guy right here, I made a whole video on him, Ulysses, and you could watch that on my channel. That was the last video I made. What else can I say? It was a hard book. I'm happy I read it. I still feel the same way I did when I put up that video. My opinion still stands. I don't know what else I can say other than I'm glad I read it. I'm happy I read it. I don't have to read it if I don't want to. I don't know if I will read it. And finally, on the red list is Knife by Salman Rushdie. I'm a little disappointed in myself for not reading Rushdie sooner. I've always wanted to read Midnight Children. I'm a little sad at myself that it took this attack on his life for me to be curious enough to actually take the plunge into his work. So for those who don't know or don't remember, Salman Rushdie is an Indian British author who got into some hot water when he wrote his book, The Satanic Verses. I'm not going to dive into the controversy surrounding that or of the fatwa that Iran issued and all that jazz like that. What happened was when he was at a conference, at a literary conference, Mr. Rushdie was the subject of a knife attack that nearly killed him. He was stabbed multiple times. He made a steady recovery, albeit without the use of his right eye. And so he decided to document this experience and what happened and his psychology of it in this book, Knife. I've read a lot of messed up stuff. I've seen a lot of messed up stuff. The way he describes the knife attack was some of the most horrifying words I think I've ever had to read, let alone from the victim of said event. But not only that, but Rushdie's a really funny guy, and there's moments in here that made me chuckle. There are just some really wonderful passages in here too. I think the first chapter of this book has the record for the most highlights. Rushdie definitely pulled out all the stops in this. It's a really good read. It's not for the faint of heart, and I definitely more likely to read Midnight Children now than I was before. I'm just really sad that it took this horrible attack on his life for me to take that plunge. But I'm very happy that he's alive, that we have this wonderful writer still with us who's still writing and who still has it. He's still got his writing chops, as evidenced in this book. Mr. Rushdie, I don't think you're going to watch this, but if you do, thank you. And I hope that the rest of your life is without any turmoil and distress. So now we're going to move on to the audiobook section of this list. As I said, I read 6 books, but really I'm going to condense it into 3 because 2 of them are series. And the first one I decided to do was the Lord of the Rings trilogy. I'm going to be honest, I didn't read all of the Lord of the Rings. I read The Fellowship traditionally, like with my eyes. And then I could not bring myself to read any more of it. And it's not a critique on Tolkien's style of writing or anything like that. But I don't know. It just wasn't doing it for me. I kept starting and stopping. So finally I decided I was going to listen to the book this time around. And I decided that for The Two Towers and for The Return of the King, I would buy the editions with which Andy Serkis narrates the book. And this was enjoyable to listen to. Serkis is a great narrator. And when I tell you, the biggest smile on my face when he went into his Gollum voice for the Gollum sections, oh my God, it was such a gleeful moment. And it felt like no time was lost with Serkis and his Gollum voice. What can I say about The Lord of the Rings? It's the story of good and evil, about an evil ring, and about hobbits overcoming the greatest obstacles. I mean, we all know the story. We've seen the movies. We're reading the books. We're watching the show. The other series that I listened to, I actually finished it up. I listened to a bunch of it last year, but I decided I needed to finish it this year. And that is The Expanse. I listened to the last 2 books of this series. And this is a great space opera light in the future when space travel and the solar system's pretty much been colonized and such. Mars and Earth don't like each other. There's these outer belt, pretty much people who were born in 0 G gravity, and they're thinner, they're taller. They speak in a sort of space Creole. They're scorned by Earthers and such. There's this big divide. And then to throw a wrench in everything, bioterrorist organization is testing the waters on this bizarre bug called the Phoebe bug. And what ensues after all that is this story of humanity coming together, breaking apart, story, and this alien bug, that's origins, what it means for the solar system, and how it improves and also is the scorn and the downfall of humanity. James S.A. Corey was a really good writer. Actually, it's 2 guys that wrote this book. It's a space opera that's, I don't want to say casual, but it's exciting enough for anybody to just pick up, and it has all the good narrative moments. There were moments where when the book was starting to feel like a drag, something would happen and it would be like, oh my God. And I think by book 5, my heart sank at a big monumental event that occurred in that book. And then finally, I listened to The Wager by David Grann. Grann was thrust into the spotlight with his other book, Killers of the Flower Moon, which was just adapted into a movie. It was a fascinating story of this man of war ship called the Wager, shipwrecked, and the ways of which the crew survives the trials and tribulations and the mutiny that happens. It was really fascinating and interesting to listen to, and really Dion Graham's narration of this book really sold this. I mean, he could tell this story, and it was exciting. And that about wraps it up on what I've been reading. What have you guys been reading? How far along are you on your book goals? For me, I know I'm not in the triple digits with what I've read, but it doesn't have to be. I know my reading, 12 books isn't exactly triple digits here, but it's not a competition. It's just simply just reading and learning at my own pace, just like we all should. So if you feel like, oh man, that's a lot of books, don't feel that way. If you read 1 good book this year, that's awesome. If you told me you read over 100 books, Awesome. Love that for you. I'm just taking it on my own pace, as we all should, what you can read. So if you're feeling sort of like you're not reading, you're not meeting your goals because of time or anything like that, I just want you to know that this is a safe place and that whatever progress you've made is progress enough for me in my book. And I hope you all take care of yourselves, take care of each other, be kind to one another, and I'll see you all in the next one. Take care. Bye-bye.